I'm Rabbi Julia Andelman, Director of Community Engagement here at JTS, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's session of our summer series of Wandering People, Jewish Journeys, Real and Imagined. Special welcome to any first-time attendees. We have a different kind of journey today, the journey of a play and sort of how it was a product of and affected and was an expression of the community that it came from, the communities that it went to, and the impact that it's had. So we're so pleased to have Dr. Edna Nahshon for the first time in our Monday series. Thank you so much, Professor Nahshon, for joining us, and we can't wait to learn about the Dybbuk with you. I want to thank Harriet Seiler, who has sponsored today's session at the Chacham level in memory of her grandmother, Anna Silverstein, her mother, Esther K. Silverstein, and her daughter, Dr. Sharon Seiler. Thank you so much, Harriet, for your sponsorship, and we're honored to dedicate today's session to the memory of your loved ones. Thanks to everyone else who has made donations to support this series. And if you are inspired by the opportunity to learn with JTS scholars, we'd love for you to partner with us by sponsoring a learning session. Tani is putting more information about that into the chat. We have 2 sponsorship levels, and if you'd like to learn more, you can contact learninglives@jtsa.edu. So Tani Schwartz-Herman now will share a few more announcements before we begin our learning for today.
Thank you, Rabbi Andelman. So just to go over how we'll do Q&A for those that have not joined us before, Dr. Nahshon will pause for questions periodically throughout the class, and we will also have Q&A period at the end. You can use the chat feature to submit your questions to Rabbi Julia Andelman. During the Q&A period, Rabbi Andelman will select a few of the questions to present to Dr. Nahshon. For any technical or logistical questions, you can initiate a private chat with either myself or Lynn Feynman. Dr. Nahshon will be sharing a PowerPoint presentation that will be screen shared today. I'm so pleased now to introduce Dr. Nahshon. Dr. Edna Nahshon is Professor of Theater and Drama at JTS. Her specialty is the intersection of Jewishness, theater, and performance. She has done a great deal of work in her field. She has authored several books, most recently Wrestling with Shylock, Jewish Responses to the Merchant of Venice. She also recently curated the exhibition New York's Yiddish Theater from the Bowery to Broadway for the Museum of the City of New York. The exhibition was accompanied by a book of the same title, edited by Dr. Nahshon. I'm so pleased now to turn it over to Dr. Nahshon.
Can everyone see me and hear me? Just nod your head. Okay, welcome to our discussion of the Dybbuk, the most renowned work of the Jewish dramatic canon. There's plenty to discuss. I hope I'll manage to say everything I want, but we will also take a break or 2 for Q&A. Before I start, I want to publicly thank Cameron Bolkin. I don't know if she's here with us right now. Cameron, a former student of mine, was immensely helpful in organizing this event. And Cameron, a very recent graduate of JTS in Columbia, thank you so much. I very much appreciate your help. All right. I'll start with so I will start with some very basic information concerning Dybbuks, followed by information about the author of the play, and then we'll proceed to discuss the play itself and its 2 foundational productions, one in Yiddish, the second one in Hebrew. Can everyone hear me now, by the way? The sound okay?
That's great now, thanks.
Okay, so let's start with the first one. What is a Dybbuk? The Dybbuk, as you can see, is a disembodied human spirit, usually of a sinner, that finds haven from its sufferings in a kind of netherworld between paradise and our life and Gehenna by invading the body of the living person. Belief in such spirits was especially prevalent among Jews of 16th and 17th century Eastern Europe, but we find it also among Sephardic Jews. And it was believed that a miracle worker, a rabbi, a Baal Shem Tov, a tzaddik, could expel the harmful Dybbuk through a religious rite of exorcism. The word Dybbuk itself derives from the Hebrew root DBK, Dalet Bet Kuf, which means to adhere or to cling. So, is there a gender aspect to this phenomenon? Absolutely, yes. In his unique collection of Dybbuk stories, published in 1983, Professor Gedalia Nigal, a distinguished scholar of Hasidism and Hasidic stories, asserts that the majority of people affected by Dybbuk possessions are young females, mostly teenagers, brides, and recently married women. So it's easy to see the similarity between the sexual act and Dybbuk penetration of another human body. It sort of speaks for itself. How do we explain Dybbuk possession? There are, of course, different explanations, and there's no one definitive explanation for every single possession. Some anthropologists explained that in a rigidly patriarchal world, where the selection of a marriage partner was entirely dictated by one's parents, sickness served as the main venue to escape an imposed marriage. And physical and psychic weakness of the possessed allowed a person to escape an unwanted and imposed wedding. Being possessed then by Dybbuk can be seen as an expression of protest against the traditional hegemonic social order. Next. How can a Dybbuk be expelled? Well, as I mentioned, by a miracle working rabbi. However, the exorcism process is difficult and draining and consists of an exasperating struggle between the exorcist and the invading spirit. The Dybbuk needs to agree to depart the invaded body. And he, I use he because it's usually a masculine Dybbuk, sets conditions for his exit. His usual demands are that the normative Jewish mourning practices be accorded him. That is to say that the Kaddish be recited for him, memorial candles be lit, mourners will fast and pray for his soul, and so forth. Okay, so let's move on to the author of our play, the Dybbuk. The play was composed by Shin Ansky, pen name of Shlomo Zalman Rappaport. Ansky was born in a small shtetl in White Russia to a Hasidic family, and like the boys around him, received a traditional Jewish education. As the youngster grew older, he became interested in the world beyond the shtetl confines. He taught himself Russian and immersed himself in Russian literature. Fired up by the revolutionary spirit of the age, he left home when he was 17 and devoted himself to serving the oppressed Russian masses through education and radical propaganda. he got into some trouble, and in his late 20s, he left for Paris, where he became secretary to the revolutionary Russian philosopher Pyotr Levrov, and finally returned to Russia after well, sort of liberalization that followed the 1905 revolution. Ansky became, though completely Russified during this period, he gradually became more involved in Jewish affairs. He was greatly influenced by the modern Yiddish literature of Yud Lamed Peretz and began to devote himself to Jewish culture. In addition to his various political and literary activities, Ansky also became an ardent student of Jewish folklore. And in the years 1912 to 1914, he conducted alongside composer Joel Engel and artist Solomon Yudovin a historic ethnographic expedition that sought to collect artifacts and folk traditions in the Jewish Pale of Settlement, and eventually to be housed in a special museum devoted to Jewish ethnography and folklore in St. Petersburg. So here we actually see Ansky interviewing subjects during the expedition, one of the Shtetlach. The expedition work was cut short by the outbreak of World War I. Still, the three returned to St. Petersburg with an impressive collection that included 2,000 recordings of folk tales, 1,500 songs, some 1,000 melodies, and hundreds of photographs. In addition, of course, to various objects. His play, The Dybbuk, was greatly influenced by the findings of this expedition. Joel Engel, close friend of his, of Ansky's, recounts one event that strongly impacted his friends and served perhaps as the initial inspiration for the play. And here it goes. He said, we stayed with a wealthy Jew in Yarmolinsky. During the dinner, we witnessed a secret, silent courting game between the host's daughter and the yeshiva student who dined at the house. The father interrupted this modestly conducted romance by announcing that he had decided to marry his daughter off to another man. During the night, we were awakened by the girl sobbing. Ansky got up and went to his notebook and wrote down until the morning with great excitement. This love made a great impression on him. Ansky wrote his play in Russian. He began his work in probably late 1913 or early 1914. The writing of it became a long process riddled with the uncertainties and anxieties of a writer seeking comments and reassurance from colleagues and theater professionals. Ansky submitted the play to two prestigious Russian theaters. First, the Alexandrinsky in St. Petersburg, which rejected it due to its Jewish theme, and then to Konstantin Stanislavski, the artistic director of the Moscow Art Theater. It is claimed that Stanislavski made editorial recommendations led to some important rewrites of the original play script, including the addition of a key figure, a new character, the messenger, a symbolic figure that served as a sort of one-man Greek chorus, and who heightened to a large extent the metaphysical aura of the play. Here you can see a picture of the messenger. There was an initial attempt in 1917 to mount the play at the Moscow Art Theater in Russian, but the project was soon abandoned as the Russian artist felt unqualified to engage with the intense Jewishness of the play. Stanislavski told Ansky that the play really ought to be produced by Jewish actors who could engage with its unique spirit and render an authentic representation of the character and of the milieu of the play. Ansky's quest for reassurance and feedback was not limited to the Russian sphere. He translated his play into Yiddish and held public readings in various cities. Actor David Vardy of the Habima recalls in his memoirs an evening that took place in Kiev in 1917. Ansky was giving a public reading of the Yiddish version of the play with the entire Jewish intelligentsia in attendance. The revered Hebrew poet Chaim Nachman Bialik was in the audience. When pressed for his opinion, Bialik tried to keep to himself, but unable to avoid the public pressure, the reluctant poet finally stood up. He praised Ansky for, and I quote, assembling and anthologizing the rubies and pearls of Jewish folklore. But in the same breath, he likened the play to a pile of clipped fingernail parings, alluding to the old Jewish custom of carefully gathering the refuse before throwing nail parings into the fire. Clearly, Bialik regarded Ansky, whom he knew and liked, as more of a collector than an artist, and essentially deemed the script a folkloristic pastiche, which was now waiting, he said, for the great Hebrew dramatist who would mold and transform it into a genuine work of art. Ansky was obviously devastated. Who wouldn't? Bialik, regretting the sharpness of his public remarks, promised Ansky he would make it up to him. And he did. He produced a masterful Hebrew translation of the play. The translation was commissioned in 1917, so around the very same time. At some point between the February and October revolutions, by Hillel Zlatopolsky, a wealthy Muscovite industrialist, who was an ardent supporter of Hebrew cultural activities. The translation, which appeared in the March 1918 issue of the Hebrew periodical Hatkufa, marked the first publication of the play script of the Dybbuk. The upheavals of the Bolshevik Revolution forced Ansky to flee Russia. In the fall of 1918, the weary author, already sick with cancer, arrived in German-occupied Vilna. While there, Ansky became excited when it seemed there was a chance for a stage production of the play. However, all his belongings, including the manuscript of the Dybbuk, had been left in Moscow. According to one source, the person who saved the day was a German Jewish army officer who had brought with him from Berlin a few volumes of Hatkufa, one of them with Bialik's translation of the play. This made it possible for Ansky to reconstruct the Yiddish version. Still, in the meanwhile, nothing was happening with the play, though the Habima company in Moscow decided to produce it in Bialik's Hebrew translation, but no specifics were given, and the whole thing was kind of not terribly clear. In 1919, Ansky left Vilna for Warsaw, always a man on the move. In Vilna, he tried to interest the Vilna Troupe, a respected Yiddish art theater, in his play. They declined. On November 8, 1920, the 57-year-old Ansky died of a sudden heart attack. Everyone was stunned. He was a very beloved figure. And his funeral was attended by 80,000 people from all walks of life and all ideological strain, which is important in terms of Jewish life back then. Members of the Vilna Troupe attended as well. As the body was lowered into the grave, the manager of the Vilna Troupe made what seemed like a spur-of-the-moment announcement and pledged that the company would stage the play in exactly 30 days upon the completion of the 30-day period of mourning. And the promise was kept. On December 9th, 1920, the Vilna Troupe opened the production of the Dybbuk at the local Elysium Theater. Oh, there we go. You see the advertisement. Originally planned as a tribute to the recently deceased Ansky, the production proved a spectacular success. Jewish Warsaw flocked to the theater. Simple Jews, the intelligentsia, Polonized Jews who would never step in a Yiddish theater, and even devout Hasidim all came to see this wondrous new play. The Dybbuk became a cult phenomenon. There's no other word for it. And its reputation spread all over the Jewish world. Okay. So let's move on to the play, which is also known by its other title, Between Two Worlds. The play is obviously set in a world very different from ours, and yet it has kept its vitality, not only due to its poetic feel, but also because it engages with issues that still occupy us: gender and class, wealth and poverty, love and religious piety, this world and the next. I'd like to give you a taste of the play, and you'll listen and you'll be able to read a scene in which Leah, the play protagonist, questions her nurse. It is a long speech in which she questions her nurse about the afterlife. What happens to a person whose life has been cut short? What happens to the children who are unborn? What happens to the love that was not fulfilled? Can it just disappear? It must be here somewhere.
When a person is born, he can look forward to a long, long life. But if he passes on before his time, what happens to the life he hasn't lived? What happens to his joys and sorrows, the thoughts he had no time to think, the deeds he had no time to do? What happens to the children he had no time to conceive? Where does everything go? Where? Oh, once upon a time there was a boy. His soul was lofty, and his mind was deep. A long, long life stretched out ahead of him. Then, all at once, in a split second, his life was cut short, and strangers buried him in a strange soil. What happened to the life he never lived? The words he never spoke, the prayers he never prayed? Frada, when a candle goes out, we light it again, and it keeps burning down until it's gone. So if a life has not burned down, how can it be possibly snuffed out forever? How can that be? No, Frada. No human life is ever lost forever. If anybody dies before his time, his soul comes back into the world and lives the lifetime that he should have lived on earth. It does the deeds he never got to do. It feels the joys and pains he never felt. Frada, you told me that the dead come into the synagogue to pray at midnight. You see, they come to finish up the prayers that they had no time to recite. My mother died when she was very young. She had no time to do and feel and know the things that she was destined for on earth. So now I'm going to the cemetery. I'd like to ask her to attend my wedding and lead me to the canopy with my father. And she will come and she will dance with me. And that's what always happens to the souls that leave the world before their time is up. They lurk among us, but we never see them. We never feel their presence.
Thank you. So, what kind of a world does the Dybbuk present us with? It is a phantasmagorical Jewish world that is steeped in religious piety and a deep belief in mysticism and magic. It is a world with the normative boundaries that separate the living and the dead, male and female, matter and spirit melt away, and the frenzied desire of flesh and spirit fuse. It is a world where the dead exist in immediate proximity to the living, where a dead man can be summoned to testify at the rabbinic court, and where a woman can deliver a live baby only if another woman also loses her own baby. It is a universe pulsating with supernatural forces, where synagogues are old and sad as if they were human. Can we go to number 13? Okay. And here, there's one nighttime visit of Leah, the protagonist, and her friend with Frade, the nurse, to the synagogue. And this is how she describes the synagogue. Look how human it feels. Can you play it, please?
Girls, a synagogue has to be sad. At midnight, the dead come to pray, and they leave their sorrows here. And every morning, when the Almighty weeps for the destruction of the holy temple, his holy tears flow into all the synagogues. That's why their walls are always damp, with tears. And the walls must never be whitewashed. If ever they were, they would get angry and hurl stones.
So the story. The play tells us a tragic love story that arises from the everlasting potency of an unfulfilled oath. As the play progresses, we find out that years earlier, Sender, Leah's father, had made a pact with his yeshiva buddy. Both their wives were pregnant at the time, and the two friends vow that if one had a baby girl and the other one a baby boy, the two will be joined in marriage. Years have passed, and Sender, now a rich man who has forgotten his vow, is keen on marrying his beautiful daughter to a suitable spouse, not realizing that Hanan, next slide, please, a brilliant but poor yeshiva student at the town synagogue, is actually his old friend's son. The young Hanan is intensely attracted to Leah. Slide 15 and 16, please. Obsessed with a desire to obtain her hand in marriage in whatever way possible, he engages in an ascetic life of self-denial, fasting between one Sabbath and the next, and immerses himself in the study of Kabbalah and magic. Having strayed from the boundaries of normative Judaism, he explains to Henech, his learning buddy, the allure of Kabbalah. 17, please. Can you play it, please?
The Talmud is profound, it's grand and splendid, but it shackles us to the earth. It doesn't let us soar to the heavens. The Kabbalah, however, it tears the soul away from the earth. It carries us to God's highest palaces. It opens all the heavens to our eyes. It takes us straight to paradise. It draws us all the way to endlessness. It lifts a corner of the infinite curtain. I'm worn out. I feel faint.
When Sender, Leah's rich father, arrives at the synagogue late at night and announces that he arranged for Leah to be married, Hanan is shattered. He cries out. Can we have the next slide, please? Were all my efforts useless, all my fasts, my ritual ablutions and my spells, and all the mortifications of my flesh, was everything for nothing? And what now? Where should I go? Where can I get strength? Grabs his chest, straightening up with an ecstatic face. Ah, I see the revelation now. The huge, the twofold utterances of the name. I see it now. I've won. I've won. He utters the word and collapses on the floor. Okay, this is the end of Act 1. Now we're at Leah's wedding. The wedding has begun. According to custom, she has gone to the cemetery to invite her dead mother to the wedding. But she also deviates from tradition and invites Hanan. even though he's not a family member, he's not supposed to be invited. The wedding festivities are on. Food is offered to the town's poor, and they engage the bride in an exhilarating and exhausting traditional dance. Leah is finally led to the chuppah, and as the groom attempts to put the wedding band on the bride's finger, she bursts out with a scream, crying out, "You're not my bridegroom." Hanan's spirit has entered Leah's body, and his male voice now emanates from her possessed body. He has become a Dybbuk, a soul that clings ferociously to the body it has invaded. Next slide, please. Following a harrowing scene of rabbinic exorcism, the exhausted spirit of Hanan finally agrees to depart. In principle, Leah now, though completely weakened by her ordeal, is free to marry the intended groom. But she cries out to Hanan and chooses to die. Next slide. She chooses to die so her spirit can unite with that of her beloved in the world of the departed. And what follows is one of the most beautiful love scenes you will ever encounter in drama. Let's go to the next slide. As Leah cries out to him to join her, his spirit responds. I smashed all barriers. I conquered death. I flouted all the laws of time and space. I wrestled with the powerful and ruthless. And when my final spark of strength was snuffed, I left your body so I could return to your soul. And she responds tenderly, come back to me, my bridegroom, my husband. I'll carry you in my heart as a dead man. And in dreams at night, we'll cradle our unborn babies. We'll sew shirts for them. We'll sing lullabies to them. Weep, oh weep, my baby sweet. No cradle for you and no sheet. Babies dead and never born. Babies lost in time, forlorn. The play ends with the same melody with which it began. I think we need to go back to number 13 and play it. Is it for 13 or no, it was 10, I think. Yes, it was 10. Yeah. Again. I think this would be a good moment to take a short break. And before I get into the production, the two productions of the play, how do we work it out, Tani?
We have plenty of questions that have come in, so I will pose some of them for you.
Okay.
I think that melody will be in my head for a long time. Okay, so a few people have asked about just in general about this idea of possession that you explained to us so clearly. First of all, were there parallel ideas in the non-Jewish world at the time? And more specifically, someone also wants to know if there are any parallels to the idea of women being accused of being witches in other cultures.
Well, no, the Dybbuk is a uniquely Jewish phenomenon. There are all kinds of other psychic phenomena in other cultures, obviously, but no, this is Jewish. I've not heard of any non-Jewish Dybbuk. As for women, of course, women are weaker. Women, on the one hand, were subjugated, but they were also feared by men. So yes, but what I can also say is that madness in women, and we have a few other examples of it in Jewish stories and in drama, is also used for the same purpose because of not engaging with another man. Because once you're quote unquote mad, you kind of draw a circle around you that no one dares pass. And in a way, within this weakness, you are in a way protected. Once the woman has been exorcised, then everything can go back to normal. This story is very different in terms of its ending, the choice to die, but normally the woman would be set out immediately to be married to the man her father chose for her and be a good wife and a good mother. So yes, madness was the only weapon, in a way, you can say a woman had. Madness and sickness. Otherwise, could not really control her life, especially a young woman, and especially when it came to romantic matters. Any other question?
It seems, I just wanted to follow up on what you just said. It seems like there's an interesting interplay here between these sexist tropes of women's madness and then the social conditions of women being trapped into these scenarios. But then there's also this this is an empowering thing to have this Dybbuk, and it's almost, I guess I'm wondering, was this kind of a self-empowerment tool that women came up with, or is there sort of almost a tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, let's pretend we're crazy and we get out of it? Or it's fascinating.
I mean, no woman who was possessed actually wrote about her experience. And I think that if you want to call it madness, also has its certain social conventions. I mean, I just thought to myself the other day, when I was a little girl, there were always stories about crazy people who said they were Napoleon. Nobody today would say he's Napoleon because people don't know very much about it. So there's certain ideas, certain concepts that are very much somehow in the air. The fact that a different voice emanates from the body, well, we have to this day in some Christian culture, the idea of speaking in tongues. Where do these sounds come from? It's part of a very, very large concept but it too is bound by culture and by history. And with Jews, this particular idea of the Dybbuk, of the transformation of souls. I didn't want to go into this whole thing because that would be a lecture of a different sort, and this is not really my métier. But with Jews, it became Dybbuks. Nigal collected in his book, if I remember correctly, 80 stories from Jewish sources. I checked some old Jewish newspapers from the late 19th century and still found a few Dybbuk stories, not stories, I mean accounts of Dybbuk possessions. And surprisingly, quite a few of them came from Spanish and Italian Jewish newspapers. This is Sephardic culture. So you have that there too. But of course, the phenomenon has become very, very well known because of this play. Otherwise, I suspect not too many people nowadays would know about it.
Right. There are a few questions about superstition and sort of how superstitious the culture was, the Jewish culture was at the time, and more specifically about the play. Do you think it was meant as a critique of a superstitious culture?
No, it was not meant as a critique. Ansky wanted to there was a feeling that Jewish culture is changing very rapidly, and he wanted very much to preserve it. He was excited by the story, by the mysticism of it. However, he himself was not a religious man, and he had his radical ideas. And so at the very end, what happens is that Leah rebels. She rebels against the system and joins her husband in death, who also rebelled against the system, who got engaged in the forbidden study of Kabbalah. So the idea of rebellion at the end of the play is definitely there. This is not the way it is supposed to end in traditional Dybbuk stories. And that is definitely Ansky's addition to the tale.
Do you want to take one more question?
Sure.
So there were a few questions about that song, the opening and closing song that you played up. Just if you can tell us, just tell us more about it. I mean, one thing that I was noticing actually is that there was, part of it is in Aramaic. I didn't know if that was Bialik or if that was Ansky. Sort of
No. This is Ansky. This is definitely Ansky. The recording, however, is from the Hebrew production of the Habima, which unfortunately was never filmed, or I should say it was filmed by the BBC but got lost. But there's a sound recording made some years later where they kept it exactly as it was in the original, with the original actor. And if anyone goes to the webpage of the Habima Theater, you can find a link to a full recording in Hebrew of the play. I think it's also available on YouTube. But the music is by Joel Engel. The lyrics are there courtesy of Ansky himself. No, that was entirely his.
So the
prayers and chants were in essence in Hebrew, Aramaic. So we're not
right.
Okay.
Okay. So we have more questions, but why don't you go ahead and we'll come back to questions at the end.
All right, as you wish. I'm more than willing to take another question or two.
People have so many questions about it's more generally about Dybbuks. How does it relate to the idea of a golem? How does were they used to explain mental illness in some people? and people are raising all kinds of other works of literature and theater and opera that have similar Mexican. It's just so many parallels. So it's like you said, we could have a whole session.
Oh, we can spend a whole night discussing these things. I only want to say that a couple of years ago, I found on YouTube a live recording of an exorcism that took place not too long ago in Israel. And of course, it worked. It was exorcism of, in fact, of a yeshiva guy, not of a woman. And of course, it takes two to tango. If he believes in the power of the rabbi to do it, then it works. If you don't believe in it, then there's no point in it. But the whole thing was recorded. I was astounded by it all. But if you look for it carefully, you'll find it. I think it's still there. All right, let's go to the Vilna Troupe production. As I mentioned earlier, the world premiere of the Dybbuk was presented by the Vilna Troupe in Warsaw in 1920. We know some, but unfortunately not enough about that production. Here's what we do know. I'll summarize what we have. The staging was entrusted to the very capable hands of David Herman, a local director who had previously worked with the Vilna Troupe. He had been influenced by the new trends in the European and Polish theater and had the extra benefit of a Hasidic upbringing that made him comfortable with this whole Dybbuk material. Like other future directors of the play, Herman introduced some changes into Ansky's play script, cutting lines, consolidating act 3 and 4. And he also added choreographic and musical element that went well beyond Ansky's direction. One of the most conspicuous was the insertion of an artistically choreographed dance of death into the play's wedding scene. The scene was replicated in the 1937 Polish Yiddish film of the Dybbuk, which largely reflects the Vilna Troupe production and features its leading actors. Opinions differ regarding the addition of this dance of death scene. Let me share it with you so you can form your own opinion. And that's slide number 23. Let me perhaps continue with some more information. The production had a very strong musical element, but unfortunately, we do not know where the music came from or even who was in charge of it. No credits are given anywhere. One review mentions the presence of a choir, but unfortunately does not provide any more details. Was the music composed or arranged by Edna Nahshon, who wrote the music for the 1937 films? Perhaps, but I'm not at all sure. What we do know is that the director expanded the role of the vocalized verses from the Song of Songs that are sung by canon in Act 1 and made it the central musical theme of the production. The Song of Song music was used several times in key moments and evoked the erotic yearning of the two lovers who are so deeply embedded in Jewish religious culture. We also know that Herman had the actors use non-realistic, liturgically inflected speech pattern This sort of sung declamation is known as recitative, a style of delivery that allows opera singers to use the rhythm and the delivery of ordinary speech. The use of recitative was still a very heightened mode of delivery and added a surreal and perhaps dreamlike dimension to the spoken text. Let's see if we can watch the Dance of Death now. Tani?
Yeah, I'm going to share it.
We'll see it in a minute. This is a wedding. This is the Batren.
Ein narrischer Mensch ist dein Mie in dein Opfer. Musst heu dir dein Läufen, dein Schnappen, dein Jugend, als dein Gebein wird men's hei wie zum Käfer tun. Es wird nicht helfen, kein Philistinisch, kein Geweih, als muss lebt, mir soll immer vergehen. In hast die dein Freit, wirst die euch weinen in Gichen, du so leben für ein Mensch, ist sie ja beuten Tanz geglichen.
Thank you. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. As I said, we don't have too much information about the production, but we have a couple of photographs. I'd like to share one with you so we get a sense further up. Yeah, number 24. We get a sense of the physical appearance of the production. So you see the cemetery is very much in the background, and clearly you can see that there's music just a second before possession takes place. Now, look at the sides. That's interesting. We know that Herman added a secondary curtain that consisted of a giant talus. And even when drawn, as it is in this image, the curtain was always visible. And like the music, it enveloped the action on stage with an atmosphere of spiritual and religious devotion. In addition to the Dance of Death, Herman preceded the play with a short, silent prelude that foregrounded the theme of spiritual love. It presented the mutually attracted otherworldly figures of Leah and Chonan, accompanied by the messenger, against the talus curtain. The short overture set the mystifying mood that prevailed throughout the production. We don't know much or any, in fact, about Herman's work with the actors, whether individually or collectively, What is clear, though, is that actor Avram shown in the role of the exorcising tzaddik and was the most acclaimed actor of the production. He reprised his role in the 1937 film, which you can watch in full, by the way, on YouTube. The sad ending is that he was killed in the Holocaust. Very talented actor. Herman's directorial approach led to debates within the Warsaw Yiddish intelligentsia. Some thought the play should have been better served if done in a realistic mode, free of all the atmospheric touches with which the director infused it. Others admired the symbolic staging and found it most fitting to the play. In any case, the play was so successful, it did not take long for other Yiddish theaters to launch productions. Maurice Schwartz of the Yiddish Art Theater, slide 25, please, produced the play in New York in 1925. Soon the Dybbuk renown went beyond the Jewish stage. In 1925, it was performed in German in Berlin and in Polish in Lodz and Krakow. A year later, it was performed in English in New York by the Neighborhood Playhouse. 1926, it was done in Ukrainian. And in 1927, proved a great success in London, Copenhagen, where it was done in Danish, Stockholm, where it was done in Swedish, and there's some information of productions in Bulgarian, French, and even Japanese. What can I say? Ansky's rejected play had become the first Jewish play to join the international dramatic canon and become an international hit. And he never lived to witness any of it. I must say that the play's international fame was also greatly enhanced by the 1922 Hebrew production of the Dybbuk, staged in Moscow by the young Habima Company. It was a history-making production that would stun the world with its fusion of traditional Jewish culture and the aesthetic of the Russian avant-garde. Can we see the next slide? Yeah, you can see the Russian program and the Hebrew program. Some basic information on the Habima is required here. In 1918, the mostly amateurish Habima Company was incorporated as an independent studio into the venerable Moscow Art Theater system and came under the direct tutelage of Yevgeny Vakhtangov, Stanislavski's most outstanding protege. It was an incredible feat that would have been truly inconceivable a couple of years earlier. The actors were to get the very best training imaginable. No other Jewish actors, or for that matter, American actors, received this sort of a rigorous artistic and ethical education. Habima's production of the Dybbuk needs to be seen within the context of three separate revolutions which coalesced in a particular moment in the most fortunate manner. First was the rise of Zionism and the quest for a national and cultural renaissance with a revival of the Hebrew language at its epicenter. Second, we have the Russian Revolution, which at first liberated Jews from Tsarist oppression and for a very brief historical moment allowed for an intensive flurry of Hebrew and Zionist activity. And third, there were the new developments in the Russian theater. Though they began before the revolution, they gained momentum in its aftermath when it seemed that not only the world, but the arts too, were being created anew. It was then that Moscow experienced an explosion of theatrical innovation and turned into a theatrical mecca. The revolutionary spirit invigorated artists who wished to move beyond verisimilitude and Stanislavski's psychological realism. Evgeny Vakhtangov was one of the most original talents in this newly configured theatrical terrain. He had lost interest in producing a photographic reality on stage, but at the same time did not wish to turn actors into marionettes and acrobats. Instead, he merged Stanislavski's psychological realism with a heightened form of expressiveness, which he regarded as the theater's most essential quality. His synthetic approach became known in the theater as fantastic realism, and it was fully manifest in his work on Ansky's play. Unlike the Vilna Troupe, Habima's work on the Dybbuk was a long and arduous journey in the manner of the art theater. Vakhtangov, who was not Jewish, he was of Armenian descent, became captivated by Jewish culture, and the young Jewish actors responded with intense love and reverence. Away from home and kin, influenced by the Hasidic setting of the play, and perhaps transferring the emotional bond familiar from their traditional background, the actors often spoke of their relationship with Vakhtangov in devotional terms. He was their Rebbe, and they his admiring Hasidim. Habima began its work on the play in 1919, before Ansky's death. But Vakhtangov became ill mid-course, and work on the Dybbuk was suspended until his recovery. In 1920, with Vakhtangov's health temporarily improved, work on the Dybbuk resumed in full force. It was an all-consuming process where every word, gesture, and sound was carefully analyzed and polished. The actors were called to delve into the farthest depth of their mental and emotional resources with utmost seriousness and intensity. Bialik, who in 1921 spent time with the company, then rehearsing the final act of the Dybbuk, described his experience in the following words. Can we see the next slide? I used to sit with Vakhtangov day in, day out for 3 successive months, watching them until 3 and 4 in the morning. But I grew tired. My body demanded a few hours of sleep and rest. They would stay, I was told, until 8 in the morning. I don't know whether that was a dream, an obsession, or a state of intoxication. It is likely that in the midst of the various events of the revolution in Moscow, with all its upheavals and vicissitudes in the life and existence of things, Habima had its share of intoxication. And it did indeed intoxicate everyone else about it. The most unique aspect of Habima's work was, at the time, was the use of Hebrew as the language of production. The fact that the actors were working with a language that was not their native tongue, for which there was no established stage pronunciation, a language that their director, who was working with the Russian script, did not understand, and that many, if not most, of their potential audiences would not be truly able to follow, had tremendous artistic ramifications, leading to an innovative configuration of the language, of the musical qualities of the language. The noted Russian critic Sergei Radlov wrote that the production's use of Hebrew served as proof that the theater does have its own unique language, and then that it uses the spoken word differently from literature. Quite a novel idea at the time. Some went as far as to suggest that had the play been staged in a comprehensible language, its realism would diminish its theatrical magic. One example of the voice work that they did and employed was chanting. Actress Haile Gruber described the genesis of this chanting feature. Playing the role of a mother, praying in the synagogue for the life of a pregnant daughter, she had difficulties with the scene. She was saying the words, but was missing the feeling behind them. Vakhtangov suggested that she sing the meaning of the words, but without saying the words themselves. She was at a loss. Next slide. But then something happened. Then all of a sudden, a memory of a chant I heard as a little girl in the synagogue on the Day of Atonement came to me. It was a heartbreaking chant when the cantor begs in front of the open ark for all of Israel. I started chanting the tune the best I could remember it. And then, for the first time, I felt what it meant to beg for someone's life. Now the words did not hinder me. Chanted, they strengthened the appeal. In addition to Vakhtangov, two important artists had considerable impact on the production. The first was Yoel Engel, an esteemed musicologist who, as you recall, was a member of Ansky's ethnographic expedition. He wrote the music, which was based on melodies he collected with Ansky, and later composed the Dybbuk suite, which you can hear played to this day. Also of great importance was Nathan Altman, who designed the production's striking sets. Can we go to the next? He designed the sets, as well as the costumes and the unique makeup, we'll see it in a second, which were crucial in shaping the production's unique look. Altman represented the traditional shtetl through the graphic vocabulary of the Russian avant-garde and included stylized Hebrew letters in his overall design. He confined himself to a near exclusive palette of white, black, and gray, and occasional colorful details such as a green coat or a pink dress became therefore particularly striking. The makeup was extraordinary. Let's go to the next slide. Faces painted in curious cubist design, looking like grotesque masks, with noses white on one side, black on the other. Mouth pulled out of shape and eyes rendered eerie by circles and arches. Let's look at the next. Can we see the, yeah, thank you. This hyper-stylized expressionism was reflected in the actor's movement, as the familiar contours of the human body was broken up by stooping or heavy leaning to one side. And this unsettling expressionism was reinforced by the intense geometry of the stage design that was typified by hyper-angular off-center and unproportional sets. As with the Vilna Troupe, dance played an important role in this production. And some claimed that the most memorable scene of the Habima Dybbuk production was the beggar's dance during the wedding feast. Originally, Vakhtangov had invited a ballet master of the Bolshoi Ballet to choreograph the dance, but he rejected the results as overly aestheticized and devoid of motivation. He was also not interested in the beggars as folkloristic or ornamental element. Instead, he transformed the beggars into a central element of his interpretation, which was greatly influenced by the revolutionary spirit of the time. In his interpretation, the beggars were filled with anger over the miserable existence that had been forced upon them. Victims of the greed and oppression of the rich, they're consumed with hatred and a desire for vengeance. He increased their number from Ansky's 7 to 12, with every beggar having a unique life story, as well as a specific physical deformity. Collectively, the beggar's objective was to upset the rich man's wedding and support Hanan, the spiritual rebel, in his quest to unite with Leah. It was their extreme fury and hatred that motivated them to dance, despite physical pain and deformities. Not only were the beggars' physical deformities extended beyond realistic boundaries, they also assumed animal characteristics that gave their fury a wild and inhuman quality. Thus, the roles of the actors playing the beggars were triple layered. Each beggar was an individual with a unique personal history, a character inflicted with an amplified deformity, and a stylized impersonation of an animal with specific physical characteristics. I'll read you just one example of the direction he gave the actress playing Drazel, a tall, thin, and sick woman who had tuberculosis. Her long, wild hair was a remnant of beauty long gone. Her animal quality was that of a hungry wolf. Vakhtangov explained to her. Can we go to the next slide? You're a hungry beggar woman. Watch your hands. Grab the bright hungrily with your crooked, rheumatic hands. Grab everything in sight. You have long forgotten how it feels to hold something good. You take things with an ugly, depraved grasp. When you're about to get up for your dance, you do it slowly. You are sick, but what pulls you up is your desire to take everything you have been deprived of. The desire is located in your bony, dirty fingers. The fingers begin to crawl on the table, and then the rest of your body follows. I'm not going to give you more details about the other actors. They're quite similar. But let me just perhaps conclude with a description of the scene by one of the witnesses. I think it's slide 38, if I'm not mistaken. Lost youth and crippled life, burned out hope and flaring anger. All this dance was wild and agonizing. And in the midst of all this evil, among the lame and the crooked, we see the white and bright Leah, the dream figure of youth to which all withered arms extend. They wish to dance with a luminous and pure bride, the ugly, degenerate women who haven't danced for 40 years, the repulsive men, as though they have conjured a dream of an angel. They're drawn to Leah, thirsty and hungry. And she, the innocent, in love with her dead fiance, turns and circles among them with formal grace. Her dreamlike beauty makes the heart expire with love. She appears like a rose among them, like a diamond on top of a heap of garbage. The contrast is masterful, the impression beyond comparison. Let me just say that the Dybbuk opened in Habima Small Moscow Theater on January 31, 1922. The premiere was attended by the Jewish elite and by major personality of the Russian stage. It was described by those who attended as a glorious feat. The production was celebrated by Moscow dramatic critics who unanimously regarded it as a major event in terms of the Russian stage. Now, the resounding success of the Dybbuk stood in stark contrast to the overall Soviet suppression of Hebrew activities. By 1926, the Habima knew it was time to get out. Having performed the Dybbuk 300 times, mostly in Moscow, the company left Russia, supposedly on a tour, but it was clear to everyone they were not going to come back. It embarked on a tour of Eastern and Western Europe and then the United States. Can we see the next? Critics were astounded by the production. For many, it was an opportunity to acquaint themselves with the sweeping vibrancy of the new Russian stage. Brooks Atkinson, next one, please. The mythological drama critic of the New York Times wrote about it in glowing terms. Let's see, just, you can read some of the highlighted material. It was
we do to finish up, Dr. Nahshon.
Yeah, I think we will stop here. We'll avoid some of the more of the afterlife of the Dybbuk, and if anyone has questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Well, you've left us wanting more.
I
So
wanted to share with you the last scene of the film, the Exorcism scene. What I think we should do is I'll take questions, I'll answer them, and if anyone wants to stay on, I'll play the scene. How about that?
Okay, so I think we'll officially close. So first of all, I just want to thank you. It's, I saw the Dybbuk as a child, and you've brought it all back to me, and made me want to see it again, of course, now as an adult. So thank you for for sharing the journey with us, how it was interpreted and received in these different contexts. It's really fascinating, starting with such inherently powerful material, but then seeing the different ways it can be applied and rendered. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and the story of the play. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you join us next week. I'm just putting into the chat next week's session, which has interesting resonances for us today in terms of vaccine passports and what have you. So I want to also thank again our sponsor for today, Harriet Seiler.